D.C. I'll try to. I cannot maintain eye contact with all of you at the same time without falling over. So what I'm going to do is try to be faithful but brief in describing the results of a National Academy of Sciences panel that was launched a few years ago, had this membership, a merry band of misfits that tried to address how one might go about combining multiple sources of data and what are the issues. So it's quite pertinent to this meeting today. We had, as a statement of task, a long set of words, but the key, very long sentence is in the middle, I think, and that is this panel was founded with a belief that our traditional methods, while dear to our hearts and well understood, and the devotion of our sole attention, were fraying at the edges, and we could continue what we're doing exactly the way we've done it at some peril. And so the panel was invented to address what are the issues to get us from here to there, with hope that the excellent work of the federal statistical system would still be viewed as excellent 20 years from now. So it was a big task. It was funded, and a special note of thanks to the Arnold Foundation. Those of you who know Connie Citro, who has led the Committee on National Statistics within the National Research Council for some years, she had walked the streets of Washington looking for funding for this panel for some time without success, and it was only through the generosity of the Arnold Foundation that this happened. And so it's worth, when you find yourself in an odd moment talking about private foundations, to give a good word to the Arnold Foundation. We have issued 2 reports that you can download for free at nap.edu, National Academies Press, and just type in multiple data sources and you'll get the 2. I think the second one is still in pre-pub. I don't think it's out on the streets yet, but you can download everything. I want to give you a sense of the scope of the panel's work. This is an outline. This is a chapter heading of the second report. The first report had its most important recommendation that we need a new organizational entity within the federal statistical system to do this. We needed a service, if you will, that would serve all of the statistical agencies in combining data, a service that had the legal authority, so laws have to be changed to pull this off, to acquire data for statistical uses for the benefit of all the agencies. That was a big recommendation. That this was a report issued in February, and to the delight of the panel, the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking suggests the same thing. And if you've been following this, the House bill has been passed, and we're waiting for the Senate for a piece, some of the recommendations of the Commission. I want to talk today, because of the focus of this meeting, why you are here, about what we said on quality frameworks, because we, as John has hinted at, believe that we have to expand what we think of in terms of quality when we start putting data together. And I want to just give you a whirlwind tour of that as kind of a kickoff to your day. In that chapter, we called for a new quality framework, and the work of the FCSM is, in the vineyards working on this right now, and it's very timely to do this. That had to be a broader framework. We paid particular attention to administrative data and private sector data, and here we just hint at real conceptual problems, and I'll say a little more about this, on data that you could label as found data or harvested data or scraped data, where we don't have control and there may actually not be a consistent stimulus that produced the data. So, we are people who create stimuli that create data. Sometimes they're questions, sometimes they're other stimuli, and we control that. We're very proud of how we've done that. But now we're in a world where we will have at our disposal data where the stimulus is actually unmeasured. We don't know what produced the data, and that's a new world for us, and so we talk about that. Academy reports, as you know, have conclusions and recommendations. They're always written in too many words for you to ever remember. I apologize for this. Conclusion 1 said, we've done a good job. This community has done a good job on getting serious about quality concepts, and that's a good thing. We believe and we know, right, that even with our current paradigm, we're better at the conceptual framework than the metrics that could be attached to each of the error sources. So we know more about our errors conceptually than we do in quantitative terms. So those are two conclusions. We as you, were influenced by the total survey error paradigm, and I want to just spend a second on this. We think of error, I think, as arising in most sample surveys from two sources. On the right side is the sampling side of what we do. On the left side is the measurement side of what we do. And we put those together, and this is all descriptive of, at the bottom, quality properties of a survey statistic. And I want to just say one conceptual thing on this. We talk about properties of quality of a survey statistic without talking much about the use of that statistic, right? And that's a mismatch that we've been comfortable with because we've done a pretty good job as a community on the ellipses here of getting quantitative measures of some of these, either routinely or through special experiments that give us insight into the quantification of this. And then we talk about those as properties, quality properties of a number. And we don't talk much about what if I use that number for one purpose and you use that number for another purpose? How does the quality notions change? And hence, there are other notions of quality on the left that, Eurostat and OECD and the European statistical agencies, I think, really took the lead on, but have influenced us. And if you look at those words on the left and ask yourself, okay, how could I quantify those things? It gets harder. It gets really hard, and it gets impossible on some of these. So one of the conclusions of the panel is we're going to have to pay more attention to that left side than we have before as statistical agencies, because in combining data sources to produce statistics, the combination may be much more use-specific. So we're going to have to pay a little more attention to this. And then the second reason we need, and I'll pay attention to the word timeliness, the third from the bottom. We know that we're going to be combining data sets where the temporal extents of the measurement will vary. We're combining things that were measured at one point in time with things measured at another point in time. So we didn't have that problem before, right? We controlled the time. And when the time was really long, we ignored the fact that things were measured at different time points. We just blew that one away, and it's a weakness in our paradigm. We're going to have to pay attention to this, and there are other things like that. So I wanted to point out those sorts of things. So let's talk about timelines. So the one thing that we, you know, when we're talking among ourselves and we're honest with one another, we don't do too well on timeliness as government statistics, official statistics. We are very, very proud of ourselves when we can pull off a monthly. And you're going to hear Roberta Rigabon, who can produce second-by-second indicators. And the world is moving second by second. So I'm not saying, you know, we're not working hard, and I'm not saying I wouldn't change it, or I'm not proposing that we change how we've designed surveys to address that. I do know we are now faced with user populations that are completely dissatisfied with what we're doing, and we got to be honest with ourselves on that. Mixing data sets, as I've said, will mix data collected at different time points. Timeliness will vary. The attraction of mixing for many of us, I think, is to improve the timeliness of the resulting blended statistic. But this is an area for which we need to do some work. How do you blend data that were measured at different points in time? And how do you incorporate variation in the temporal extents into our quality framework? And do we stuff it into the total survey error paradigm and say data sets measured at different times are subject to different measurement error properties? I think what we're going to have to do is get very much more attuned to the temporal extents of the statistic we're producing, because that's going to affect how we blend. So timeliness, my hunch is we're going to be talking about timeliness of statistics, or the time extents of a statistic that we're creating in ways we've never done before. And then, as John has said, this is going to produce some obligations to our users that we didn't really have before, or we didn't think much before about. And that whole side is another piece of work, right? So what I see us doing over the next few years, there's a bunch of R&D stuff, there's a bunch of practice setting, and then there's a huge communication obligation we're taking on where the users are not us. The users are people who just count, who want to trust the numbers we put out. But we have to, with all devotion to transparency, help them through a much more complex estimation feature. Spatial granularity is another quality feature, and we know that although we try, and if we had more money, we'd be better at it, the spatial granularity of survey statistics is not wonderful, vis-a-vis what users want to do with our statistics. The panel opined on a variety of statistical models that seem to be the right family of models that we ought to peck away at and learn their attributes for different kinds of blending. You'll see those there. But once again, it automatically implies that the blending of data will be what we used to talk about as model-based estimators in a way that we never labeled our current statistics as having those properties. Model-based statistics require more obligations on the part of the constructor towards the users to understand the properties of those models. And what we have to talk through is how much sensitivity, how much multiple model fitting do we reveal, how much sensitivity analysis should we do to be honest with our users on that. Diverse measurement units will arise here. So we tend to measure in the survey world people, households, establishments, enterprises, and then there are a few others. We're going to be bringing in data measured at different levels of aggregation. And so we're thirsting, right? Many of us are thirsting over bringing in transaction-level data. These are actions of people or actions of enterprises. how are we going to play this? To what level will we make the statistical estimation dependent on the transaction level versus the person level and so on? And so there's a bunch of statistical issues here. We'll get through those, but there are also use issues and communication issues about the quality properties. So the panel concluded that timeliness and other dimensions of granularity we're not great on in the survey world. We got to wake up and pay attention to those. The recommendation out of this, as I've said, is we need to broaden our quality framework. The FCSM group working on this is perfect. We're not going to be able to avoid, as I have tried to avoid throughout my life, these last words that don't lend themselves to measurability very well. We're going to have to pay attention to those, I think. Our users will demand our attention on that. And, you know, the real race among us, I think, or the real work we have to do is to ask ourselves, how many of those will yield themselves to measurability, quantification? Can we create operational definitions of those for statistics that permit us to measure them either routinely or through auxiliary methodological experiments that inform the user about likely magnitudes of different error sources. Then I want to say just a few things about other properties. We are most attuned, I think, in fact, the biggest defenders of let's keep doing what we're doing are those who say we know the coverage properties. We use universal frames, and we take probability samples off the universal frames, and we got that down. We know how to do that. And all these other data sources, you know, aren't very attractive because they're missing important components of the target population. We're good at that criticism. We got to get beyond that, by the way. When we start blending data, we will blend in data sets that were not designed to be micro-linked. We will be doing that. They will have different coverage properties. We'll be good, I think, at estimating the coverage rate, the proportion of the target population that is covered by one of these data sets. I think we have to get a little better at trying to estimate coverage errors, which is a different issue and is survey statistics specific. So we're good at coverage rates. We need to be better at coverage error, and then we need to talk about how do you blend data together that have different known coverage error properties, and then what do you report to the users on that. The other thing that seems obvious is economists talk about the concept measurement gap. We will be blending data together. Our data, our survey data, will have known stimuli that produced each data element. We'll know about that. You know, there are people studying the properties of every question we ask. We're really good at that. And then we're going to bring in others that had a different stimulus that produces data that appear to be similar in unknown ways. So the other thing we're going to have to do is become experts on how do the data actually get generated. When we're dealing with harvested data or found data, I think our culture would say, boy, I don't want to touch those until I know how was that number produced? What's the process by which the number is produced? That becomes our obligation if we're going to communicate to the users the quality properties of those numbers. And I want to say a couple more things about that later. And let me just go on to that. The other thing that's inherent in statistics based on blending data is there's some linkage involved. In the best of all worlds, we think that we could deterministically do micro-linking. Any of you in the audience who've ever done this realize realizes that's much harder than anyone ever told you, right? The first time you do it, you get all of these funny results that are really part of a linkage error framework. So when we do it deterministically and in a single way, we're introducing some sort of linkage bias into our estimators. And our question will be, once again, how bad is it for the statistic of interest? How do we communicate that to the user? And then with probabilistic matching, how do we bring that probabilistic matching into our estimation and inference as an uncertainty? How do we actually have estimates that reflect those kinds of errors? I want to say a couple of things about found, harvested, or scraped data. I gave a hint on this. In surveys, a controlled stimulus, which is usually some sort of question. So it's a set of words that produce a stimulus to a human mind. The result of that stimulus is an utterance from a human or a thought from a human that produces a datum, all right? And people in this room collectively have written thousands of articles about that process. Well, with found data, as I've said, the stimulus sometimes isn't well understood. So just take the simplest case of administrative data. We have to, first of all, answer a question about why did a clerk somewhere in some office in some place in the United States decide to change a value in a data record? Was it a work rule? Was it a client who was begging them to change a value? What is that process? So if we were fully informed of the quality properties of the administrative data, we'd have to understand that measurement process as well as we understand the measurement process of an interview respondent. And then sometimes the stimulus is completely unknown. So there are a bunch of people working on Twitter data right now, and the measurement process of that, if you want to call it a measurement process, is just absolutely fascinating. So why do I choose to utter a tweet and you don't? What's the stimulus for me to do this? So you could say, who cares about this? But if we don't know what produced the datum that we're looking at, then we don't know how to use it properly, right? So I'm not giving you answers on what to do on all these things. I'm really giving you questions that we can't ignore anymore, right? And I would say the second one applies to a whole lot of harvested data. So if you're web scraping, those of you who web scrape know that sometimes the data sitting on a web page were produced with different intents than you thought. The number or the text that was produced there was not produced to produce a measurement in the way you want to use it. And using it the way you want to use it may actually lead to erroneous conclusions. So we have to, if you're a total surveyor kind of person, we have to enlarge the quality framework to acknowledge that we are going to have data, we're going to be using data with unknown stimuli. And we're going to have to work through that, and it will take a while. So we have a bunch of conclusions in the report about bringing in data linkage, expanding existing quality frameworks, and note, and this last conclusion is a bit of modesty. I think the panel came to the conclusion that because we think we understand the quality framework appropriate to survey data, it's okay. But when you start viewing survey data that we think we understand in the context of other data, you get a different view about what quality features of survey data we have ignored. And we're just living with it, right? And so time, the time of measurement is a great one, right? We have surveys that go on for 6 months, and then we report an annual estimate off of that. What are we doing with that? And we don't control the time of measurement. The early respondents are measured, or the voluntary respondents are measured first, the reluctant respondents are measured last, and we've ignored that. So when we bring in these other data sets, I predict that we're going to start looking at survey data quality in a different way, and that's true of all of life, right? When you only have one thing, you think it's the right thing. If you have two things, you start comparing them. That's going to happen to us. The big recommendation is that the panel, in its arrogance, has proposed that you start working on something, and that is to talk about these trade-offs, to make a serious attempt that would be consistent with the wonderful history of the federal statistical system of getting very rigorous attention to the quality of our work. And I believe that if we don't do it, if the federal statistical agencies don't do it, it's not going to happen fast enough. So we urge you to take it seriously. So one last slide. It's obvious there are things to be done. I do think it takes a whole lot of people to do them, and I would hope that the federal funding agencies wake up to this as well, and I'm thinking of the grant-based NIH, NSF funding agencies to take seriously the data side of this revolution we're going through and the estimation side. This will demand our attention to different quality features than we've done. We've had notions of them, but we haven't really paid a lot of attention to them. We're going to have to pay attention. This is all model-based stuff, as sees it. We got to make sure we have the technical skills to live that life. And then we have big obligations to users to be open and transparent about what produced our estimates. And, I've been around long enough that some of us have said the stuff we do really isn't model-based, and it's pretty simple. But I don't know whether anyone in this room is bold enough to say, you understand how the CPI is created, or take some other statistic, right? We got a lot of ingredients in the kitchen to produce what appear to be simple numbers. We're going to have different ingredients to produce what will appear to be simple numbers, and we need the same attention to user information as in the past. And I think that's going to, if you look at the technical appendices that this crowd likes to read, but not too many users, those will have to change. So once again, I could see two paths of work: a bunch of R&D that's nitty-gritty statistical estimation, kind of quality estimation work, methodological studies, and then there's how do you communicate to users. I think those are two paths that we need to take seriously so that we end up serving the American public in a way that they understand and that they trust. Right? So the ultimate variable is, do the American public trust the numbers we put out? Those are the ingredients of this. So I thank you, and good luck at all this work you're going to do.
All right, so we've got about 10 minutes if people want to take a break. The restrooms are to the right. We'll probably start right at 10:30, 10:31. So please try to get back here, and we'll talk soon. Thanks. Yeah, right here.